Rev up the chainswords and prepare to Indomitus Crusade straight out of the starter box, because today we're talking about Assault Intercessors and what they can do in-game. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy-focused 40k channel, where today we're talking about the chainsaw-wielding primaris melee troop option that I'm sure that quite a lot of people have plenty of lying around, seeing as they were featured so heavily in the Indomitus box and any of the 40k starter sets. In the video we'll have a talk over their datasheets, a quick look at their damage outputs, any obvious buffs and synergies that we can put on these guys, and how you might think about using them in an actual game. Plenty to talk about, so let's jump straight in. So here we have the datasheet for the Assault Intercessor squad, a 19 points per model troops choice for Codex Space Marines, and with the standard primaris stat line, hitting on 3s, strength and toughness 4, 2 wounds, 2 attacks, leadership 7 and a 3+ save, the sergeant as normal getting an extra attack and pip of leadership. They're each equipped with an Astartes chainsword, a heavy bolt pistol and frag and crack grenades, the chainsword meaning that they'll have an absolute flurry of attacks on the charge, with 4 strength 4 AP-1 attacks coming out of each guy. The heavy bolt pistols aren't insignificant either. Sure, you won't get as many of them as if you had a standard intercessor squad, but a bunch of strength 4 AP-1 shooting still should be able to pop off a fair bit of light infantry. I'd certainly try and remember grenades as well. If you do happen to be within 6 inches range anyway, then usually either the frag or the crack is going to be a significant damage increase over that heavy bolt pistol, particularly if you're firing at multi-wound things and you have a crack grenade handy. In general, they're just quite good at killing light infantry, and for the points cost they're relatively sturdy as well. At 19 points they're the cheapest troops choice primaris space marine, meaning points for toughness 4 wound, they're also the toughest. Only the tactical squad is a little bit cheaper than them at 90 points. They don't have as much damage output and no access to transhuman physiology, which can be all important if your opponent's trying to shoot you off an objective. The main squad doesn't have any options, they have to stick with their gear, but the sergeant can take a few fancy things, potentially trading out a bolt pistol for a hand flamer or a plasma pistol, neither of which are really worth it for the points I think. In particular, the plasma pistol's a bit dangerous on him. You don't really want to be accidentally killing the strongest model in your squad if it happens to blow up. I'd just stick with the heavy bolt pistol on him. As he has 4 attacks with shock assault though, the combat weapons are quite tempting. A power swords for +5, a power fist for +10, and the thunderhammer for +20. It is a bit weird that thunderhammers are priced higher here than they are for say firstborn marines, and it means that at least relatively speaking, the thunderhammer doesn't give you quite as much damage return for the points. If you're looking for absolutely every ounce of damage crammed into the same squad, then it could be worth it, but even just a fairly cheap power sword or fist should give you some fairly good bang for your buck. Which chapter you're playing as might also influence it a little bit. Space Wolves are particularly good with -1 to hit weapons, getting their +1 to hit and exploding 6s in their doctrine, where power swords can be really good value with Blood Angels. The slightly lower strength really likes the +1 to wounds. They have the standard Space Marine special rules with Angels of Death for shock assault and combat doctrines. They can combat squad potentially, though generally if you want multiple units of 5 it might just be better to take them like that, then you'll get more sergeants and more attacks. And they've got quite a lot of good keywords going on. They're core infantry, and they have the primaris, intercessors, and assault intercessor squad keywords. In terms of damage output, those strength 4 AP-1 attacks really are slanted towards killing hordes. Say if you charged with a 5-man unit with shock assault, you'd kill around about 8 guardsmen, but only 2 toughness 4 marines in power armor, and do a fairly underwhelming 2 wounds to a toughness 7 vehicle, though potentially you could help yourself out a bit with a thunderhammer or power fist. In the assault chapters though, you can get a lot more mileage out of them. Just for example, if you had a 5-man squad in the Blood Angels assault doctrine, even just those alone are going to go through around 14 guardsmen, 4 toughness 4 space marines, and 6 wounds to a toughness 7 vehicle. Between the extra AP, +1 to wound, and the Blood Angels extra attack that they get, you're getting triple the damage against hard targets. Of course, they do have to compete against other options. Just for the sake of comparison, here's 3 Blade Guards, who will cost 10 points more at 105 points. They're a little bit less efficient against troops, though I wouldn't say significantly. They'll still kill 6 guardsmen, but without any doctrines or anything, they're way better against toughness 4 space marines, and do over double the damage than the standard unbuffed squad to hard targets like toughness 7 vehicles. In general, I do think that that's one weakness of the Assault Intercessor squad. They're just not very general purpose in melee, and often in combat in 40k you don't really have much choice of what you charge, you just need to go through to the closest thing, whether it happens to be an ideal target for them or something that's really tough and they're not really going to do much damage against. Talking of chapter options though, naturally Assault Intercessors are just far more tempting for the 4 melee-centric chapters. The others can certainly get some value out of them, but almost all of them will add more to the ranged troops choices, or even just getting some of the Phobos armor on the go so you can secure the midfield early in the game. White Scars might be one of the very best options for them. Assault Intercessors moving 6 inches are relatively slow for an assault unit, so being able to advance and charge is excellent for them, and they won't really mind too much having very meagre shooting output to miss out on that bolt pistol fire. They'll also absolutely love the damage 2 in Assault Doctrine, which will just have them go a long way towards being more generalist threats, not just being able to kill light infantry with 1 wound. And with their relatively low strength attacks, they'll really like to be near Kossaro Khan as well. Not only does he provide them rerolls, but +1 to wound on the charge is amazing. Talking of that is what Blood Angels get all the time, of course. And while Blood Angels are kind of spoilt for choice for assault units, if you wanted to field Assault Intercessors en masse, then you certainly could do worse than Blood Angels. The low strength attacks is amazing with Red Thirst. They'll even be wounding Toughness 8 vehicles on 5s, and most other heavy targets on 4s. Bonuses to charging and advancing never hurt, and they've got a solid Assault Doctrine and some character buffs on top of that. For Black Templars, they might be competing slightly with the very cheap Crusader squads on offer. Sure, they get 1 less attack and no transhuman physiology, but for a massive discount of 4 points per model, that kind of outweighs that. I feel that might be a bit of a mark against the Assault Intercessors, to be honest. But maybe even if they're not the most optimal troops choice right now, they still do have very good synergy with the Black Templars Assault Doctrine. Again, wounding is usually the issue for the chainswords, and getting auto wounds on 6s is great. Finally, Space Wolves have access to all kinds of melee buffs, but both their Chapter Tactic and Unique Doctrine are particularly valuable with things like Power Fists and Thunder Hammers, so it provides a little bit of additional incentive to at least upgrade to a Power Fist on the Sergeant. The other chapters do certainly have their options, good buffing characters from Ultramarines, being harder to hit at range in Raven Guard, being tougher in Iron Hands, some good rerolls for the heaviest power weapons in Salamanders, better pistols in Imperial Fists, and +1 to hit on the enemy's turns in Dark Angels, but in general I just don't think that they're going to be as much of a standout choice, and maybe not quite as worth taking. As core infantry within the Space Marine Codex, there's an absolute ton of other options that you can layer on top of them, and as per usual, advancing alongside captains, lieutenants, chapter masters or chaplains can be handy. Chaplains in particular with their rerolls, exaltation of rage and +1 to charge. Apothecaries could make them a bit tougher, and chief apothecaries could resurrect them, but in general they might be a bit of a low value target for resurrections, when you could be doing the same with units like Blade Guard, Terminators, Bikes and Attack Bikes. If you've got a Librarian, they could take advantage of Psychic Fortress for a 5+ invul, and maybe even Veil of Time if you don't have anything better to cast with him. And a Judaseer could be potentially useful for making sure the enemy can't interrupt, by making them fight last and making sure that you get the first strike on them rather than the other way around. His aura is maybe not quite as easy to defend the Assault Intercessors from incoming charges though, just as if the unit's really worth protecting, they're going to have quite a big footprint with a lot of models. After these, maybe a captain or a chaplain might be one of the best bets. They can lend a hand in melee as well, and hopefully can advance along other things so they can buff other things at the same time. I'd see Assault Intercessors as perhaps one of the better options to use with the Impulsor. They're definitely a squad that wants to be getting forward as fast as possible towards the enemy, and also have Auspex, so you could do the trick where you just move the Impulsor really far and jump out the squadron onto an objective. Unfortunately, it does seem that Impulsors have fallen out of favour a little bit with Space Marine players. Currently, they're just a little bit on the expensive side for what they do, and for Assault Intercessors it's easily possible that the transport will cost more than the squad inside it. A full-on Impulsor rush tactic could be fun. You could certainly have a lot of mobility with your Space Marine Assault Infantry, but I'm not convinced it's completely optimal at the moment. Finally, we come to stratagems, and the Assault Intercessors were the only unit to keep the Honour the Chapter stratagem, the 2 command point 1 to have them fight again. This one really is quite a nice opportunistic option to have around. Potentially it could even be usable with a small unit if it's going to make the difference between whether or not you say score an objective, or clear the last few enemy infantry models so the Assault Intercessors can move on to charge something else the next turn. For raw damage output, you'd get more damage if you had a bigger squad. The only issue would be whether or not they'd be able to survive to strike a second time. I can imagine that most of the things in 40k, if you've charged them with a full squad of Assault Intercessors and they haven't taken significant damage, do have quite a high chance of hitting you back very hard indeed. Unless he's bringing more command points for transhuman physiology or something too, there's at least a reasonable chance you might not have enough Intercessors left to strike back. Still though, it's a very nice option to have in the bank, even if it might not see use most games. Transhuman physiology is generally good value on pretty much any primaris units. If you're about to be targeted by a whole load of heavy weapons and you really want the squad to survive to score an objective, it could be a pretty high value CP to spend if you didn't need it for something else. You can potentially up their damage output a little further as well. Gene wrought might for exploding 6s in melee. It equates to around about a 25% damage boost, typically not going to do enough to cause a major difference unless you're fighting with a full squad, I think. Finally, as core infantry, you can spend 2 command points to put them in the assault doctrine a turn early. It's quite a hefty price to pay, but maybe if you are playing White Scars or Blood Angels, the difference between being in assault doctrine or not can be absolutely massive, particularly if you just need that extra pip of AP to efficiently chew through something with a 2+ or 3+ save. Again, maybe one that's a bit more worth it on a huge squad as opposed to just a 5-man cheap one. So how might we field assault intercessors to maximal effect in game then? Perhaps the 3 main battlefield roles that they might fill will be putting up on the battle line towards the midfield, jumping out of transports, or potentially even holding backfield objectives. Moving forward does seem like the role that they're most suited for, particularly as they're quite cheap and therefore at least fairly durable compared with other Space Marine troops. You could just think about using cheap 95-point barebones units to foot slog up the field onto midfield objectives, be an annoying threat to remove, and have the potential to charge and kill light infantry that try and take the objective off them. If you're actually trying to use them as a sort of damage in and of themselves though, a 10-man squad might be the way to go, likely supported by a couple of characters. Maybe you could spring for a Thunderhammer on them, seeing as the Sergeant will be quite well protected, get some rerolls or litany buffs going from a Captain or Chaplain, and maybe aim to pick your combats carefully so you might be able to inflict a lot more damage by fighting twice. In general, I don't really think they're too bad for this role. The main issue is that they're competing with units like Blade Guard and Vanguard veterans. Both of these guys have storm shields, and that will often mean that they're going to be similarly tough if not tougher, and being armed with solid power weapons does mean they're a bit better for tangling with high save infantry, or harder targets like vehicles. Also, if you were thinking about taking assault intercessors, it's very hard not to get tempted by infiltrators or particularly incursors. Incursors are similarly really quite cheap, also get AP-1 in melee, but get to forward deploy, meaning that they can be really handy for objectives. I think this is perhaps the role best suited to the assault intercessors, but they do have stiff competition. In transports, I'd be tempted to take a 5-man one with a Power Fist or Thunderhammer. They can get thrown out to an objective with an impulsor, or maybe just move up and use it as a battlefield bunker to launch an assault from. Again here, they will be competing with Blade Guard veterans and regular intercessors. The Blade Guard can just mean that you get more value into the impulsor, and the regular ones may be synergized just a little bit better with its special rule, as it means that they can get out and still shoot to full effect, even after the impulsor has moved. Finally, for backfield objective holders, cheap close combat infantry might not be quite as bad an idea as it sounds. Sure, they won't be providing any of the fire support that regular intercessors would, but saving the 5 points over them does help, and if the enemy does have to try and remove them via close combat, it could make them significantly more of an intimidating threat to try and charge off an objective. Despite this, I still do prefer having the range damage output on objectives though, and either regular intercessors, heavy ones, or tactical marines are likely to do you better. So overall, I describe assault intercessors as usable, not significantly behind the rest of the Space Marine Codex, though I think it's quite rare that they're the optimal choice for many armies. Vanguard veterans and Blade Guard veterans just do the whole damage and durability thing better, and of course the Vanguard vets get jump packs, so can get to grips with the foe far more reliably. For most of the troops, if you are taking intercessors, most competitive lists do seem to go for regular intercessors rather than assault ones. Having a fair bit of range damage output is nice, and provided you are engaging light infantry, regular intercessor squads can still do quite a good job of bullying them in close combat. They don't get AP or as many attacks, but they could still potentially pommel a bunch of guardsmen into pulp. Overall though, I still think they could be solid damage dealers maybe in slightly more casual games, and they do crop up in competitive lists from time to time. High placing lists in grand tournaments for White Scars and Blood Angels have used them, but pretty much exclusively as small 5-man units. Cheap disposable OBSEC with a decent potential to punch above their weight if the circumstances align. So I'll be interested to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. Do you agree with the analysis? Assault intercessors maybe not too far behind the other troops, but perhaps a little suboptimal? They might have a few niche uses for the chapters that do best with them. As always, I look forward to hearing all your thoughts and ideas. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly be keeping the Space Marine content coming. I tend to have new 40k videos out pretty much every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying the content on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page, which is down in the video description. Making all the videos does take a fair amount of time, and if you are enjoying regularly, any support is enormously appreciated. I do try and give a fair few good rewards for Patreons who support the channel. You regularly get to see new videos earlier than anyone else, there's occasional polls to see what sort of things come next for the channel, and there's automatic entry to the regular channel prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits every month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support the channel, then the link is down in the video description. In any case, an enormous thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.